God can focus on every person as if you were the only person ever. So when he tells you to do something, he is paying attention to you with all he's got and telling you to do it and expecting you to listen. Oof, that's rough. Now we have this close relationship with God, this personal focus, this direct command, this line, this connection, this relationship almost we could call it. It's the relationship walk. We have this relationship with him because we are partners with Christ. That's what this passage says. We have become partners of Christ. This means we work in conjunction with him. We are like business partners. It's if you drove by outside and it said, Christ and Irwin on the side of a building. You two are working together. Or Christ and Sterie, partners in this work that God's doing. Christ and Porfoon. I'm trying to get across the board here so that everybody feels like they've been touched on this morning. God is speaking to you. Yes, he is. And you should listen. You are partners with God in the work that you are doing on this earth. And that partnership needs to continue. You started in partnership. That's what it says, our first confidence. You started in partnership with Christ. You really should keep it going. We need to go forward in the faith and confidence we had that we first believed. It's right up there. If we are not partners with Christ, if we fall away by the deceitfulness of sin, what are we then? If you're not partners with somebody, and Jesus makes this very clear in the Gospels, if you're not partners with Christ, what are you doing? You are opposing him. You are fighting against him. Thus we go from being partners to being opponents. And if you guys know the same Jesus I know, Jesus is King of the universe. I would rather be partners with him and have him put his arm around me and be like, yeah, me and Bobby, we work together on stuff. It's good. Then be like, tonight on, UFC 102, Jesus versus Bobby. I'd be like, oh, I'm going down. It's not good. Okay. Boxing. Sorry, UFC's younger crowd. Boxing is an older crowd. If I was Christ's opponent, I would get beat down. I'd much rather be partners with the King of the universe, with the King of Kings, than his opponent. Because if I'm partners with him, we can work together and accomplish great things. If I'm opponents with him, he's fighting against me and I'm fighting against him. He's like, I want you to do this because I think it's best because I'm in charge of everything. And you're like, I really don't have much of a say, but I'm going to exert my will anyway. That's not a good way to be opposing God. So we should maintain our partnership with Christ by keeping our hearts soft and not letting them be hardened by the easy decision to say no and say, I'll get around to that later. If we harden our hearts and become God's opponent, we're in for a rude awakening. God wants to mold us. And he can do that if our hearts are soft and supple. Think about that difference. God wants to mold our hearts. He doesn't sit there and say, you know what, you're not good enough. I won't take you into my kingdom. He says, yeah, sure, come on in. I'll take everybody. Everybody who wants to come on in, I'll partner with you. Let's go. He takes you as you are, but does not leave you as you are. He changes you. He molds your heart. And if he tries and he says, you should do this, you should get on board with this, a little bit of this, maybe go to church, maybe try singing, maybe do this service for me, maybe tell this person about me. He's molding our hearts to make it like his. But if we say no, if we fight against God, our hearts become hard and God tries to work with us but gets nowhere because our hearts are hard. It'd be like me trying to grab this podium this morning and bend it into a shape like the Statue of Liberty or like the Eiffel Tower. I'm not going to get anywhere with that. Because it's hard, because it's resistant to change. If I try to mold something that's resistant to change, that's hard, it doesn't bend, it doesn't change, it does what? If I tried to bend this, just grab this podium and bend it in half, what would happen? It'd break. soft hearts take God's dramatic change well. Hard hearts take God's dramatic change badly. Hard hearts that are opposed to God, when you say no and no and no and no and no, he has to shatter you. Take you and say, you know what? You're not listening. You're not getting this point. You're just missing the boat here. Breaking bad things. He's going to change you. This is, fear of God moment. He's going to change you. And you have the choice to let it be one way or the other. It's going to happen. God's going to work on you. And you can either have a soft heart that says, yeah, I'm going to listen. Okay. You know best. You're God. I'll listen. And then little bit by little bit, your heart changes for God. But if you say no, and no, and no, and no, and I'm going to do this my own way, and thanks God, I'm just in charge here, he takes your life and tries and tries and tries, and he says, you know what? Shattered. He changes you. He says, I'm in charge. I'm going to change you, whether you like it or not. And personally, I'd much rather have my heart molded gently, step by step, working, maybe it hurts sometimes, because you're like, ooh, new shape. Then, no, snap. How do we avoid becoming God's opponent? How do we avoid becoming hard-hearted? Look at verse 15. Look back in the passage. Verse 15, he's quoting himself, as it has just been said, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion. He can't make it any more clear. If you hear God's voice, say yes. Become a yes man to God. We often think of yes man being in the connotation of the business world where you're just like, my boss, whatever he says, I think is just great. 100% I'm on board with. Yes man. He'll get me good in the lookings or in his eyes and I'll move up in the company. God's company is a little bit different. God wants you to say yes because unlike your boss, he really does know what is best. He can see the past, he can see the future, he can see everything all the time, forever and ever, everybody, every different situation, and I think he knows what's best. So if you hear God's voice, say yes. It's like this wood carving in front of the church. I think, Gordon, did you make this? Just nod, yes. No? Well. It's like this. When God tells you something, there is one response. Yes, Lord. Yes, okay. Now, okay, curious. People here are curious. Okay, and this is just impromptu. I'm throwing this in here. How do we know what God wants us to do? How do we know when God's speaking to us, when God's giving us direction? How do we know when it's God's voice? The best thing I can do is tell you is to read this book. It's got a best-selling author. It's got a lot of pages in it with a lot of interesting things. If you want intrigue, if you want deception, if you want murder, if you want stories that would make your hair curl because of the things that are told in them, and the things we probably wouldn't be able to talk about in church, and if I did give you the story, you'd be like, fire him now? Read this book. Don't read about David and Bathsheba or the Song of Solomon. You'd be like, wow, there's some really racy stuff in there.